Hi, my name is Dave Johansson and I'm here at Blossom Hill Crafts. This is the second video of a three-part video on making pitchers. When I make my pitcher, I'm going to start by throwing a cylinder. I'm just going to drop a hole into the top of my cylinder here. And there we go. Now, when a pitcher is trimmed, it's put on the wheel right side up because you can't really turn it upside down because of the funny lip, all right? So my pitcher is going to be trimmed right side up. That means I'll never trim the bottom. So I want to leave the bottom of my pot very, very thin. Absolutely no more than 1/4 inch. Of course, you know, you've got to be able to get a wire through it and it's got to have a bottom to it. So just, you know, don't get that bottom too thick. Now I've got my hole drilled. I have to open my hole up. And that's my first consideration. The wider I open it up, the wider the foot of my pitcher is going to be. So think about that foot. What do you want the foot of your pitcher to look like? Alright, so I'm going to open this bottom up a little bit here. And I'm going to open it up fairly wide. Alright. Now that I've got my bottom open up here, I'm going to compress the bottom a little bit. I always find that compressing the bottom helps with the S-cracks and problems like that. So I like to give like pretty much 3 runs on the compression. So the first thing we're going to throw here is a cylinder that goes straight up and down. When you're throwing a cylinder, you want to make sure the inside bottom of your cylinder is an L like this, or a perfect 90 degrees. You don't want a cup shape like this. It's very hard to get a cylinder to go straight up and down from this shape. You want this shape right here, no bowl shape, the L, all right? So we're going to take a pole up here. I also want to keep this rim nice and compressed. The rim is a very important part of a pitcher. So I'm going to take my first pole up here. There we go. Nice height on that. I'm going to leave a little extra on my rim. If I don't have a nice L and a perfectly straight cylinder, I'm going to cone in a little bit. Coning is very important. When I cone, I usually use my hands like this, touching the clay in 3 places on each side, just like that. A little water on the inside of the pot. When I'm putting water on the inside of a cylinder, my hand goes like this. The water squirts against my hand and then goes down the side of the cylinder on the inside. But remember, it's a very little bit of water that I'm using. And here we go for another pull. And there we go. Maybe I'll do one more quick pull here. I really don't want to have much thickness at the bottom because, again, it's not going to be turned upside down and trimmed, so it's helpful not to get my my bottom too thin, leave too much clay on the bottom, too thick, I guess is the right way to say it. Take the water out of the bottom there. And now I'm going to begin to shape my cylinder. I want my foot of this pot to kind of round out from the bottom, okay? So we're going to very kind of slowly round out that bottom. And remember here that a little bit is a lot. What I'm doing is I'm just laying this hand like this, and I'm pulling the clay over this hand, just like that, all right? And so I'm just going to kind of come up and give myself a little bit of a shape here. Alright, very simple shape. And now I think I'll bring that shape in a little bit. And so there we go. I'm just going to collar in. Sometimes when I'm collaring just like this very gently, I might use my whole hand and then kind of switch to this method right here. But either way, it's just kind of a slow, gentle thing. If you find your hand skipping across the surface, either you're pushing too tightly or you need to add a little bit more water. I'm going to make that rim a little bit thinner, pull up a little bit of clay there. Alright, so when I'm making a shape, I like to think in thirds. So I've got 1/3, 2/3, kind of 3/3 is usually a nice way to do it. Not quite happy with this shape yet. But that's kind of the way that I like to think about it. I'm going to take this bottom out just a little bit more, but try to keep that 1/3, 2/3 sort of thing going on there. There we go. I think I'm going to define my top of my pot a little bit. Maybe put a little definition in there. Alright, there we go. And we're going to bring this up to a little bit finer point. And there we go. So now that I've got my, my pot here, the very last thing I want to do before I put my lip on is just take this extra little bit of clay that I have down here, and I'm going to use my trimming tool just exactly like a knife. And I'm just very lightly and softly going to get some of this clay out down here. The more clay you have, the more you can take, very obviously. But I just kind of brought that down there like that. Take my knife in there like that. And voila, I've got a little bit of my clay out of the bottom. So now we're going to talk about making the lip of the pitcher, or the spout of the pitcher, I guess, actually. So the natural thing to do is to put your finger in here and your hand here and to move your finger out like that. But that's wrong. That's not how you do it. I want to start off with dry hands. I'm going to dry my hands off. My finger stays here, and I actually push in this way. I push to my finger, and that's going to leave my top nice and flat. So I'm going to push in and then come out. Okay? So again, I pushed in and then pulled my finger out. I pushed in and then pulled my finger out. And maybe I want to come down here and make that throat just a little bit more and come up. There you go. And that, notice that my top has stayed relatively flat. If I take out this way, what happens is my clay starts to get very thin here, and if my clay gets very thin there, then it's likely to chip there. If I want this to come out real nice, when the clay gets a little bit more like leather hard, I'll take my finger and just draw it across the top like this, and then I can kind of start to get that nice pouring spout that you want. But you don't want this to get too thin in here. You can have a nice pouring lip without getting too thin. So that is essentially the throwing of a pitcher. I'm going to just cut this off here and take it off. I'll set it down right over there. I'll deal with it later. Here's a pot that I threw before, a pitcher that I threw before. Very quick, I just want to talk about trimming. So when I go to trim this, all I'm going to do is put a little bit of water on my bat like this, or on my wheel head. I often don't even use a bat. It's actually easier if you don't. With a little bit of water on there, if I go just like this, I can center this up. And once I get it centered, I can take my trimming tool and trim it just like you would trim any other thing. I can sharpen up my angles in here if I want to sharpen up my angles, or kind of do whatever it is that I want to do with my trimming tool to get it nice and light. You don't want too much clay there, because a heavy pitcher is hard to hold up. So I'm Dave Johansen, and this is Blossom Hill Crafts. Thank you very much.